Hi everyone, so today we're going to start by learning just how to read and annotate a poem properly, or at least one way of doing so. And we're going to do this with Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. It's a good one, a classic, and many people already know it. It's also quite short, so we're going to start there, especially because I don't want you using this method on something like Beowulf, which is just way too long for this kind of thing. So first, I want you to read the poem like you would read anything else, a blog post, a newspaper article, anything else. We're just going to read through it first, and then when we get to the end, we'll start annotating. So this is Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. Let's read it together. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness affect you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. So already, very powerful poem, one of my favorites. And the things that I want you to ask yourself in this first read through are, what feelings did the poem bring up for you? Did it make you sad? Did it remind you of someone, something, someplace? I want you to annotate that down somewhere in the margins. In Word, you can do this by inserting a text box. So I'm just going to insert one here, and I'm going to say, for me, feelings that arose were hope, strength, maybe a little bit of sassiness. That's what occurred to me as I went through. That doesn't mean that that's going to be your take on it. It absolutely does not have to be the same thing. I'm just giving you examples. Another question I'd like you to ask yourself on this first read through is, who do you feel like the poem was speaking to? Was this a poem written for a lover, a friend, for you, for the wider society? Because for me, this poem seems to be written for an oppressor. This is written for someone who's been trying to keep Maya Angelou from doing Maya Angelou's thing. And she's saying, does it upset you? Because I'm going to keep doing it. So those are just the first two thoughts I want you to have in your head as you read through the poem for the first time. What did it make you feel? Who do you think it was written for? You can also totally doodle your responses. So for this one, you could select the draw icon, and you could draw something. You could draw something here at the top if you feel like it's just like this swirling mass of like anger and sassiness. You could include some different colors. You could do a smiley face or a frowny face. I literally do not care how you do it. The important thing is that you're tracking your own development of meaning making as you go through this poem. Okay, so second read through of the poem, I want you to underline or highlight or otherwise mark reoccurring words and phrases. So let's just continue with this red pen. And let's see, I'm already seeing that you is a recurring phrase, which is probably part of what makes me feel like it's written for someone in particular, you know, like one one oppressive body or one oppressive person. It occurs again and again throughout. But we also have the title of the poem, which we know occurs over and over again. It's this reoccurring theme that she comes up. She rises. Still I rise. Despite I rise. I rise, I rise, I rise, as you see here. So now that you've gone through and you've sort of noticed that there are some words that are in common, excuse me, you can go back and we can go back to inserting our text box, or again, totally acceptable for you to doodle your response. I'm just personally more of a text-based person. So I'm gonna write my response to the following 2 questions. What do you believe are the meaning of these repeating phrases in the context of the poem? So you, for me, is the intended audience, the oppressor. She's making sure that that person is hearing that she is going to continue to thrive in spite of them. She's calling their attention to it. And then I think Still I Rise reoccurs because it's like she says at the end here, right? The bearing of the tide. It comes in, it comes up. She returns to greatness every time. No matter, what happens with the oppressive figure, the you figure. You may write me down in history. You may trod me in the dirt. Does it upset you? Gloom, broken dot. It doesn't, no matter what happens, she always returns to greatness. Now, this is a secondary thing. Do these phrases change as they are used? So for me, I don't think that the you here or the you here or the you here is different than these yous here. I don't think she's talking to a different person throughout the poem. I think she's talking to one specific person or one oppressive entity in specific. She's not changing it where like this you is like Ashley and this you is like Jerome, and like she's not mixing it up. This is for the same person. And similarly, I think Still I Rise is this constant. It'll always happen. It always reoccurs. So I personally think that the meaning doesn't change throughout the poem for those 2 things. But you need to be paying attention to if and when it changes, why is it doing that on this second reading? So for the third read through, I want you to go through and highlight or otherwise mark phrases and passages that stand out to you. They could stand out to you because they resonate with you, or because they're particularly eloquent, or because you've read something similar somewhere else, or because they seem awkward to you in the overall context of the piece. So let's go through real quick. I'm not going to read it again, don't worry, but let's just mark out these important pieces. Actually, let's use the gray pencil. We can. Draw. I'm not sure what's happening here. Oh, perfect. Pink. Yay. Okay. So for me, oil wells really sticks out, because there's this richness associated with that imagery, even though it's kind of yucky and we don't like that we have to use oil, and there's a lot of social connotations with it, right? But we still know that there's this richness associated to it. Like if you've got an oil well in your living room, you're going to be rich beyond belief. So I think that really sticks out to me. Bowed head and lowered eyes is super visual. You can really see someone being defeated by oppression of some sort. But then we have this passage right here, which is horrendously broken up by my word processor, but it is, I think, the most famous and the most controversial part of this poem because it's sexy, right? And how is she daring to be sexy in the face of oppression? She's daring to still own her body, be herself in the face of oppression, in the context of this wider history, shame, a past that's rooted in pain. She's still choosing to be sexy. And that's a disruptive, element to this poem. So I think that this passage really, really stands out. Oh, that's a terrible drawing. You can really tell how sensitive my trackpad is. Anyways, so for me, that's the most important thing. But also, I would say that this repetition here is very important. It illustrates that it's going to continue. She's not going to continue to give examples of all of the history, shame, and the pain, or any of the other things that she's faced. She's just going to keep rising, and you can count on her to keep doing that. So now that we have gone through and we've highlighted these passages that mean something to us, let's answer these questions. What makes those passages stand out? And I went into that as I went through, so I'm not going to go through it again now, but we can go through oil wells, richness, lowered eyes, defeated posture. We're going to call that the sexy passage. Disruptive in its bodily and sensual nature. And then these last repeated. And note my annotations are not grammatically correct. They're not for anyone but me. So you really don't have to put any detail in there that you don't need to understand this poem when you look back at these annotations later for, research or however you're using this poem. Or even just to write it down and put it back on your shelf. To show that she is going to continue to thrive in the face of oppression. Okay, so those are the things that make them stand out. And what meaning, again, I went through this as I highlighted it, but what meaning makes these things stand out, right? These are things that are directly related to the poem. Every pink underlined thing we put in here is directly related to the theme of the poem, the overall theme. And what we get from this, from the oil wells and the defeated posture and the disruptive sexiness and the fact that she's going to continue to rise, what do we get from that? For me, that's an overall feeling of hope, of strength, of fortitude, of defeating an oppressive regime by mere existence, the richness of human existence even. And again, you may not get that from that, and that is totally fine. That's a completely normal part of interpreting poems and literature, is to have a very different answer from the reader next to you. The important thing is just to ask yourself these questions. So, now that you've asked yourself these questions, I want you to look through all of your notes, not mine, all of your notes on this poem, everything that you wrote down, all the highlights, etc., and maybe even read it one more time if you're not sick of it yet. And I want you to ask yourself, what is the main idea of this poem? And these your previous annotations should sort of get you there, right? Because we took it in these small parts, these small highlighted parts, and we broke it down. And now we're putting it back together again. We're making meaning again after these smaller sort of anatomical parts. We're putting together the body of the poem. What does the body mean to you? Again, the body means to me that she is going to continue to thrive and do her thing no matter who tries to keep her down. But that may not be what you get from the poem. And again, that's good. Human variation is a normal part of interpreting art, and especially literature. I want to know what you got out of this. I don't want to know what you think you should get out of this. I want to know what you got out of it. That's where the real meaning making lies, is how you feel, how you interact with the art. So ask yourself, what is the main idea this poem is trying to convey? And then use your annotations here to answer. And then just write yourself like a quick, few sentences on what you feel like that is. That can be at the end. Again, that can totally be a drawing. I am certain that all of you can do better than this horrendous one-eyed smiley face situation. But, do something so that when you come back to this poem, all you have to do is reference that quick final annotation to know what this poem is about. So for me, I would just insert another text box and put in, this poem is about thriving in the face of oppression. And then for me, though I've read this poem many times, I can come back to this page and I can read that and I can know exactly what this poem is about without having to read or annotate it again. Now, when you get to this part, if you feel like, okay, well, I pretty much understand the poem at this point, I think you're dang right. I also think there's always more to ask. And one of those things that you can ask is who wrote the poem, not just the author themselves, but the demographics they belong to, the history they share, and the time they lived in. This can give us some really great information about what particular words meant in that time. Like, was gloom a word that people used in everyday language in the time that Maya Angelou was writing? Or was it a specially sought out word, something that she plucked from her reading to use in this specific context, beset with gloom, that makes it seem more Victorian sounding, makes it seem older even than, Maya Angelou, who was practically our contemporaries, although she's gone now. So go look at that sort of thing. Who was the author and what society did they belong to? But then secondly, and I think more importantly, there is another question that I think you can ask if you've gone through all of this and you're looking for more, which is, who benefits from the message that this poem is conveying? This should be considered in consideration of the power structures in the society that this poem was produced in, but also in your own as the reader. Does it dismantle or build up existing hierarchies of power? And hierarchies of power, we're thinking like racism, misogyny, ableism, homophobia. Does it build up or break down those things? And lots of poems, arguably, don't do either, right? They're a poem about a beautiful day and the leaves are green and we're talking about the leaves that are green, and that's what you get from the poem. And you don't feel like it's out there to build up or take down any sort of societal norms, right? That's totally valid, totally valid. But in a poem like this, a poem written by Maya Angelou, there is all sorts of societal meaning in here. She is largely speaking from her own experience, but also for the experience of African American women in general, African American people in general. And we know this partially because I know a lot about Maya Angelou and the focus of her work in general, but because she uses this word right here, slave. And we know that Maya Angelou was American and an African American, so we know the kind of slave she's talking about here, and what has happened to those people throughout our history, and especially out of the past that's rooted in pain, what they're doing now, or now in terms of Maya Angelou and when she wrote this poem, right? But also now in terms of when you're reading it. That's important too to consider. So there are always more ways to consider something. There's a whole field of research called literary criticism that does this. But this is all you really need to understand a poem, truly.